The Department of Public Health and Human Services is pleased to bring you Aging Horizons, Medicare, Social Security, fraud and legal issues, veterans benefits, and caregiving. Aging Horizons is a program dedicated to inform and prepare Montanans on these timely issues, making a difference to you and your loved ones. Here now is today's program host.
Hi folks, today on Aging Horizons we're going to be presenting part 2 of our series, Early Montana Medicine and Epidemics. We have a great guest with us again today. Her name is Ellen Baumler and she's from the Montana Historical Society. She's going to have a great deal of information that's both informative, educational, and fun. So stay tuned.
Summer in Montana is a great time to visit your local farmer's market. Enjoy the social atmosphere while shopping for a wide variety of fresh, locally grown produce. Together with both WIC and Senior Farmers Market nutrition programs, you help feed your family 5 or more daily servings of fruits and vegetables for better health. You also help local ag producers and enhance the state's economy. So, for summer fun that's nutritious and helps Montana's economy, shop at your local farmer's market.
Good care is your right. In Montana, there's over 11,000 beds in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. If you or a family member needs assistance or help in obtaining information about care issues and placement options, call 1-800-332-2272. If you or a family member need information about Montana's long-term care resident rights, or if you need help solving a problem or a complaint about a nursing home or an assisted living facility, call us at 800-332-2272.
Questions about Medicare and other types of insurance? Contact the State Health Insurance Assistance Program office to get answers to questions like, what is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, and how do you decide if you need Medicare supplemental insurance? This insurance counseling program is not a sales program. It is available to provide answers to your insurance questions. For more information, call the State Health Insurance Assistance Program office at 1-800-332-2272.
If the Aging Network in Montana was a restaurant, the sign out front would say, over 50 million meals served over the last 30 years. Since adequate nutrition is critical to health and quality of life, nutrition services are an important factor in keeping older Montanans healthy, independent, and living in their community and home. To find out more about senior nutrition programs in your area, call 1-800-551-3191.
Hello everyone, welcome to Aging Horizons, brought to you by the Department of Public Health and Human Services. I'm Kimmy Everman, your host, and today is part 2 of our series, Early Montana Medicine and Epidemics. We've been having a great time talking about some of the early ways that illnesses were treated and the kinds of instruments used, and we have a very special guest to help us with that, Ellen Baumler from the Montana Historical Society. Ellen, welcome back.
Thank you for having me again.
So good to have you. Sure. You know, we have been talking in this series about different mining camps and boats and things where epidemics began. My question is, you know, what kind of challenges did these gold rush doctors face? Because, you know, the gold rush started in 1862, 63, 64. So at that point, I'm assuming there were doctors here. Tell us some of the challenges that they were facing.
It was really a battlefield that they came into. I bet it was. You know?
Yeah.
And they really had not very much to treat illness. Basically, they used things like this, which is an invalid's cup. They fed them, you know, what broth they might be able to find and whatever liquids they might be able to scrounge around.
And for a moment, these were actually from your family.
Yes, actually, each grandmother had one. So I have one from each grandmother. Yes.
Wow.
And they did use them, you know, and they prevented spills when you're lying down in bed. You could easily feed someone with those. But the Gold Rush doctors really were heroes, and some of them were excellent doctors. Not all of them were. Right. Back then, you could hang out a shingle if you had no medical training at all, and a lot of people did that.
Right.
and probably did some damage. But one of the really great doctors was Dr. Jerome Glick, who came to Virginia City, and actually he writes about an experience he had, probably the worst surgery, the most uncomfortable surgery he ever performed was on Henry Plummer's shooting arm, because he had taken a bullet here, and you know, Henry Plummer was later hanged by the vigilantes. But he was captured, Dr. Glick was captured or kidnapped and taken to this
To treat this guy.
cabin to treat
Wow.
Henry Plummer, who had been shot. And he had to perform the surgery at gunpoint.
Wow.
And you know, that was a delicate surgery anyway, and Henry Plummer carried that bullet in his arm, but he did regain the use of it thanks to Dr. Glick's skill. And also, Dr. Glick supposedly once performed an amputation on a 3-year-old child.
Wow.
With no anesthetic, and he was so skilled that the child never cried.
Wow.
Didn't even apparently feel any pain.
Wow.
So he was a very, very skilled physician.
That is
a
a
lot
hero.
of them, you know, really were skilled like that.
Right.
Dr. Steele was another one that delivered countless babies, and into the 20th century, when he was an elderly man, some of those babies that he delivered were still giving him Christmas presents, you know. But one of the things that the doctors very early on complained about was that there were no trained nurses.
Right.
And nursing was very important, you know, because the doctors had to travel very far distances sometimes, and they couldn't stay, they couldn't always stay. And so nurses were, were very important, and the first trained nurses that came to Montana actually were the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth, Kansas.
Oh.
And they came in 1869 when the gold rush was almost over, so they sort of missed that. But when they came in 1869, they established the first Catholic hospital in Helena, which was St. John's Hospital. And from that, many other Catholic teaching hospitals developed across Montana. But you know, these sisters were really something else. They rode by horseback to the mines, and they begged for funds to be able to build the hospitals that they built. And when the Battle of the Big Hole happened, they were among the first to ride by horseback to the battlefield and take care of the wounded. And at that time, there was a hospital in Deer Lodge, which was the closest place. And so they transported all of those wounded. I think there were 40 people that were injured, and they were very, very badly hurt. And by the time they finally got the patients to Deer Lodge, many of the wounds were infested with maggots. And you know, I mean, just the conditions are just, it's very hard to imagine. Even in the hospitals, the conditions were very, very primitive.
Well, and I was going to say in our last minute here that the challenges that they faced were also about dirty conditions and not having clean instruments, maybe not having enough of the medicine that was of the day and that sort of thing.
That's exactly right.
And so it would have been quite a difficult task, and probably the nurses were heroes as well.
Absolutely, that's for sure.
Yeah, and you also sort of talked to me about some diphtheria that broke out. Now we have just a few seconds. If you want to start to just tell us a little bit about what that was about.
Well, diphtheria was a dreaded childhood disease. It didn't only affect children, but it was something that killed a lot of children in Montana, and the doctors you know, really had their hands full when there was an epidemic. And it's interesting that they considered Montana a healthy territory, because an epidemic would be considered if 5 people died.
Wow.
And we don't think of an epidemic as, you know,
just 5 people.
But that was considered an epidemic. And diphtheria was one of the major problems, and it was a horrible disease, because a membrane will grow across your windpipe, and the person then basically suffocates.
Well, folks, we have a lot more to tell you, so don't go anywhere. Stay with us.
Are you looking for a helping hand through the maze of human services, or for information on government programs and benefits that you may qualify for? The Information and Assistance Program provides information on all programs that meet our aging population's basic needs and programs that enhance their lives as well as the lives of their families or caregivers. If you have questions about Medicaid, Medicare, or other services and programs, please call 1-800-551-3191.
The face of the American workforce is changing. People are healthier, living longer, and living better. Baby boomers are a valuable resource for the workplace of today and tomorrow. They're still active and eager to help. Experience, dedication, wisdom, these are just some of the significant assets older workers bring to the job. Age is an asset, experience a benefit.
Here in Montana, we love our outdoor activities. Unfortunately, few of them are risk-free. Indeed, Montana is second in the nation per capita in head injuries that can destroy the lives of people we love. That's why you should insist your family always wear protective helmets. But you can do even more. When you fill out your vehicle registration this year, circle the Y and donate $1 to support traumatic brain injury prevention and education. Now that's using the old noggin.
Every generation produces heroes, men and women who step forward to defend our country in time of need, no matter the personal cost to themselves. And though we can never fully repay them, we can make sure they have access to low-cost, long-term care when they need it. That's what Montana's Veterans Homes are all about. If you've got a hero in need in your family, call us. We can help.
Hi folks, welcome back to Aging Horizons. We're talking about early medicine in Montana with Ellen Baumler. And Ellen, when we left the last segment, we were just starting to talk about diphtheria and what a difficulty that was. Yeah. And you told me that although there were more than one outbreak of diphtheria, really the 1880s were probably...
That's the ones, you know, that we know about
right.
the most. And maybe just because we have the best documentation, it's a little more difficult in the earlier time periods. But I'm wondering if maybe the coming of the railroad, which was in 1883, might have precipitated some of these contagious diseases. And certainly we know that the conditions when you rode the stagecoach were just horrendous.
Really?
People would spit on the floors, and you know,
and
I mean,
tobacco spit, right?
Spit,
yeah.
And you know, it was really, really pretty horrendous, and the trips were very long, days at a time, not bathing.
Right.
Well, they probably didn't bathe
well,
anyway.
And
but
the stagecoaches were not like, they're not like in movies where they're huge.
No,
they were
people
very
were
small.
really crammed in there. That's absolutely right. And contagion was not very well understood.
Right.
Doctors did understand that contagion was responsible for, you know, the epidemics, but educating the public was really, really difficult.
Certainly.
And you know, one case in point, in the town of Elkhorn, there was a doctor who was the doctor for the mine there. And of course, he had to take care of the children too. Many of these doctors really didn't know much about children's diseases, although they did, you know, care for children. And there was a terrible diphtheria epidemic in 1889. And Dr. Dudley had a child at that time. He and his wife had just had a child. Child was maybe a year or two old. And his child died of this epidemic. And, you know, could do nothing really to prevent the spreading of this disease. And his wife was pregnant again. And so Dr. Dudley ended up fleeing the territory, really, to save the life of his unborn child.
That must have been difficult as a doctor, knowing he's probably one of the only people that could do anything.
And he left the community without, you know, without a physician. But if you visit Elkhorn, you can look at those really poignant tombstones in the cemetery. And one of the really poignant stories has to do with two young boys who were 10 and 11, and somehow most of the children were wiped out by this epidemic in 1889, but these two boys escaped, and they didn't get sick. And in the fall, they found an unexploded canister of gunpowder. that they had used for the 4th of July, and they would put the gunpowder in a large container and explode it. And they had found this unexploded container and managed to explode it and blow themselves up. And here these 2 young boys escaped this epidemic, and they're buried in a common grave because they couldn't even, you know, identify them.
Oh, dear.
It's just so tragic, you know, that's so tragic. Just a real twist of fate. And then in Helena, in 1885, there was a horrible diphtheria epidemic here, too. And Dr. Mariah Dean, who made quite a name for herself, she founded a lot of institutions, including the Mountain View School for Girls, and helped with the YWCA here and that. But she also was a specialist in the diseases of women and children, and she understood contagion. She was professionally trained overseas, and she was a very smart woman, and she was chairman of the Board of Health at that time. And she imposed a $5 fine on anyone who hung their bedding out on the, you know, that was the common thing, to hang your bedding over the fence.
Sure.
But in a house where there was sickness, that's the way the disease spread. Apparently, or could. And so she quarantined houses where the disease was present, and that had never been done before. And the public was very upset with her for doing that.
Well, and I suppose the fact that she was a woman as well in that position may have been a challenge for her.
And you know, the thing that is just really brings it home is that in the newspaper, among the obituaries of people who had died during this epidemic is an advertisement for a children's program at the Episcopal Church saying, "Let the church be crowded," you know, and you think, oh my goodness.
They really didn't understand.
This epidemic, they really didn't understand that. And educating the public was probably the hardest thing.
Right. Now, Ellen, we just have about a minute and a half left of this segment, but I'm really interested if you could tell us about some of the treatments for this diphtheria.
Right. Well, there were probably doctors, even some doctors thought that the treatments were worse than the disease sometimes and killed patients. They would take silver nitrate and paint the throat of the person to supposedly prevent that membrane from growing across the windpipe. They would take sulfur and blow it into the person's nostrils with a quill, a porcupine quill. They would take turpentine and heat it on the stove and have the person breathe the fumes. And they would paint the person's throat, you know, with other caustic things, and sometimes the treatment did kill the person where the disease didn't. Maybe the disease would have too, but...
Well, and when you think that it's pretty much a childhood disease for the most part, that must have been very challenging.
It's probably the worst way a parent could watch a child become ill. You know, and knowing that this membrane was going to grow and eventually choke the life out of the child. And there was nothing it could do. And during this epidemic in 1885, Dr. Brooke lost 2 of his own children to this epidemic, and he understood contagion. And he moved his children to a different household far away from Helena, and they still, you know, became
tragic. But folks, not so tragic that we don't want you to stay with us. We have some more information to share with you, so stay tuned.
Sometimes the difference between having the life-saving medications you need and going without is the premium on your Medicare drug insurance. If you are a Montana resident enrolled in the Medicare prescription drug program, you may be eligible to receive help with your premiums. Even if you own your home or other assets or think you may have too much income, call or visit the Big Sky RX website today to find out if you qualify.
There you go, ma'am. See you next month.
Thank you.
Cover your mouth or your ears. Now use the telephone. For people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, or speech-disabled, your state's Relay makes it possible. Anyone who uses a standard phone can talk with this important consumer population. With Relay, it's possible.
It's possible.
It's possible for you to talk to me
for me to talk to you.
It's possible! Dial 711 to use your state's relay.
I didn't know. Montana has one of the highest suicide rates in the country.
Know the signs.
Depression.
Isolation. Giving away possessions.
Alcohol abuse.
It's what you can do now that matters.
Don't be afraid to ask. Are you suicidal? Tell someone.
Don't leave the person alone.
Offer hope.
Call the Lifeline.
Don't keep suicide a secret.
Break the silence.
It was a beautiful day. There was about 2 square feet of ice near the door, which I slid on and fell, cracking one rib. And I became somewhat frightening for me to walk outside, particularly in the winter. The Stepping On program came as kind of a surprise to me. I didn't know about it. I've learned the importance of proper balance. I think anybody who has fallen or is afraid of falling would benefit from this program.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Aging Horizons. It's our last segment today in our show about early Montana medicine and some of the epidemics that were that really affected Montana early in the 1800s. We have a very special and knowledgeable guest with us, Ellen Baumler from the Montana Historical Society. Ellen, you know, we were talking last segment about how really difficult and challenging it must have been to practice medicine in that time.
Incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
You
so
know.
what were some of the advances that started to come along?
People used to think back then that a doctor was good if he had a lot of blood on his shirt. And they would wear, you know, if they wore a white coat and they did surgery, they would wipe their instruments, because doctors really didn't understand the importance of sterilizing instruments, and they didn't really do that. And I mean, it's a wonder anybody survived at all. It really is. But that was one, I think, huge advancement in the later 1900s. Or 1800s, where doctors began to sterilize their instruments. And Dr. Tracy in Helena was really the first doctor to actually teach other doctors to do that. And because of his practice, other doctors, you know, in Montana began to do that. And the Sisters of Charity and the teaching hospitals, they also began to teach the practice of sterilization of instruments, which is really, really important. That was probably one of the most important advances you know, that came about. But also in 1894, a vaccine for diphtheria was developed, and there were still diphtheria epidemics after that, but not like they had been. And so that was, you know, a big advancement, really. And today, of course, we get the DPT shot, which is diphtheria, pertussis, which is whooping cough, which was another one, and tetanus.
But really today, diphtheria is virtually gone.
It's been wiped out. And, you know, in order to really eradicate a disease, you have to have everyone vaccinated against it.
Right.
And
so even in 2014, we're going to say people get your
vaccinations, because the diseases will come back if you don't.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so the other thing, of course, is the Spanish flu epidemic that Montana and the nation and the world really experienced in 1918.
Right.
And here in Montana, that was just a devastating event. I think there were, the statistic here, statistic is that 2,436 people died in Montana, and more than 26,000 Montanans suffered from the flu.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
The casualties were greater from the flu than they were in World War I.
Wow.
Yeah. In Montana.
And I think that 1918 outbreak is one that most of us have heard of or learned about in school.
Yeah.
So, and I always have questions about it.
I have questions about it too. You know, how could that have happened?
Right.
But again, you know, contagion still obviously wasn't very well understood. You do see people with masks in pictures wearing masks. And so, I mean, I think people did worry about that. Of course they did worry about it, but it was so highly contagious that not everyone took the precautions.
Right.
And even sometimes people who took precautions got sick.
Right.
And it seemed to attack the younger, stronger people, you know, than really the elderly, which is very odd. Yeah.
Now, you also told me that there were some problems with tuberculosis as
you
well.
know, and that was a scourge really in Montana because it's a disease that's prevalent among miners, and we had so many miners here in Montana. They called it the miners' con, or the miners' consumption.
Wow.
And so many miners in Butte died of that, and elsewhere too, where there was mining going on. It was just, it was an occupational hazard, you know, for sure. And we had a very large tuberculosis sanitarium at Galen.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. You know, we've just got a couple of minutes left in our show today, Ellen, and I guess we've been talking over the last 2 shows about early medicine in Montana and different epidemics and stuff. What would you like our audience to take away from what we've talked about today?
Well, I think that we have at our disposal, we have such wonderful medical facilities today, and you know, our forefathers didn't have that for sure.
So, and to never take that for granted.
And to never take that for granted, and to take advantage of that, and to make sure that you get the vaccinations that you need, because if you don't, those diseases will recur and will come back. And same with antibiotics. If you are prescribed antibiotics, you need to take all of the dose, you know, because if you don't, that strain that you're being treated for will never be eradicated. So it's very, very important to follow your doctor's orders.
Well, and I think also, once again, we can point out that based on some of the things you've said, Montana was again at the forefront in those days of trying to find ways to eradicate these diseases and save people's lives.
That's right. And you know, we owe a debt too to the Methodist deaconesses who established hospitals all over Montana. The Catholic sisters and the Methodist deaconesses really brought Montana into the modern world as far as medicine is concerned.
Well, Ellen, thank you. This has been such a fun series to do. We're so thankful that you were able to be with us. And you know, folks, the Montana Historical Society is just a really fun and educational place for you and the family. You can learn more about the topics we've talked about today and so much more. And it's always really a good idea to have some kind of notion of where you come from and what your roots are all about. So the Montana Historical Society can help with that. For Aging Horizons, I'm Kimmy Everman, and thanks for joining us.
Special thanks to the Department of Public Health and Human Services for their continued support. Hosts on Aging Horizons are program specialists at the Montana Office on Aging. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions. For more information about Aging Horizons, call the Department of Public Health and Human Services toll-free 800-332-2272.